Good. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for all your contributions to today. It's exceeded our expectations. So thanks. Well, we just thought maybe the theme could be teaching law in time of crisis. So we've all been really scrambling to teach during the pandemic. And we can tell you about our experiences, but is there anybody here who has got any new way to tackle this teaching in the time of lockdown?
Maybe if I just start with I've just come from the panel that Sarah was chairing, which was all about teaching law in time of crisis. So Alfonso and the other speakers were talking about their experiences, and Sarah as well. One of the things that was said to me by one of our colleagues at one point was, when we went online, that we shouldn't just regard that the only response is to go online, that there's a lot more to it. And I think that Sarah was talking about this with the fact that we needed extra things for the students in some ways. There needs to be more of it. And of course, there needed to be more from our teachers as well. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
So if I may, if I may intervene, yes, it was a very interesting panel. I want to take this opportunity to thank you and Professor Loa and all the Chinese University of Hong Kong team for this interesting discussion. What I think we need to learn, or what we can learn from this pandemic, is that, of course, we need to enrich the educational experience of our students with online, but we need to address other issues that were there even before the pandemic, and probably were kind of emerge in this time of crisis. The first one is, and really something that I think is very important, the ethical use of information and reliability of sources. We've been confronted with problems with this from our students for so long, and I don't feel universities and law schools have done enough for this. So one thing that we can learn from the pandemic, because we've been experiencing exams online. So, you know, the problem of how do we use information was really much more important than before, with home assignments, for example. Then how do we discuss that with the students? How do we introduce the idea of ethics and the idea of reliability of sources, also for the future career? And the other lesson that I think adds to the online experience is the offline experience. So training our students for human-to-human interaction the old way. And an important point for this for me is that the students will resist this, because the students like to interact online usually. A few students like to raise their hands in the class. We always have the same people raising their hands, and suddenly online everybody's participating. So another thing that we need to provide for them is offline interaction, taking them out of their comfort zone, that somehow the comfort zone is online, and take them back to the classroom and with other kind of experiences. I think this is something that we can learn from this crisis.
You mentioned the ethical use of information. Do you mean things like cheating, sort of the increased opportunity to cheat with online exams?
Yes, of course, but more broadly, I mean, I remember I had one exam that was open book in law school, and I arrived with 15 books, and for me it was like, yes, I have all the knowledge possible with me, and I can access it during the exam. When we do exams online, that is just open book on steroids. We have access to the all information in the world, and what I feel is the students, sometimes they don't know how to understand what are the relevant information, the relevant sources. Of course, they will try to cheat because everybody has tried to cheat at some point. So I think if we involve the students in a discussion about what's ethical and what's reliable, and we have kind of a module about it with case studies. For example, they will, you know, in a way feel that this is really important, and probably with less, we will witness less cheating, possibly.
I don't know if you were there for the talk given by Jenny Gibbons, but in a way it's like what you were saying. So Jenny Gibbons was saying in York Law School they found that students are using like Google instead of going to the primary sources. So as you say, whether you're online or offline, understanding what's authoritative legal knowledge and what isn't is an important thing.
Yes, absolutely. We don't use, I mean, we can use Wikipedia, but sometimes, you know, to know what Article 1 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights says, we can just go to the right website. You know, it's as simple as that, but sometimes for the students, it may not make a big difference, and we have to make clear that it does.
I think Professor Martinek raised this earlier when he said today that the students maybe not go to the treatises, they will be using online resources. And let's be honest, as you said, I think often I find myself, it's easier to Google something at times, or even Wikipedia comes in handy. But we tell the students you mustn't use these sorts of things at times.
Of course, one must see that with a certain anxiety, because as you rightfully point out, the Google sources, Wikipedia and so on, are neither certain nor accurate and appropriate nor authoritative. And insofar, at least partially, our students are obliged to actually take into account and utilize for the serious studies the actual authoritative sources, which can mainly be found in the libraries still, after all, you see. Some of the sources have already also been digitalized and so on. There's no need anymore to go to the library to look up a particular judgment, even if it is decades old, because everything now has been already made available by data bases, and that is of course a major advantage, no doubt. But you are right, there is no way to circumvene the use of the original authoritative sources where necessary, and insofar we must in fact even compel probably our students to take that very seriously.
So one thing though, you were talking about the importance of human to human, and I think several people have found that funnily enough, our students are much more likely to speak in Zoom than they were when we were face to face. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it's not just us. I know other colleagues in other faculties have found that, because I suppose they can switch the camera off, and then it gives them a bit of anonymity, and then they feel free to speak.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Actually, if I can just follow up on your point about the digitization, it is very useful. But one issue I think for our students is a lot of them have never, well, they're not used to using any form of paper resource anymore. And I think that's a big problem. I mean, we have a wonderful, hopefully you'll all come one day to the Faculty of Law here and come to our 6th floor, and you'll see our wonderful little glass box that we have, which has the residue of a library there with law reports, paper law reports in there. And the students love to have their photograph taken. But actually the only person who ever uses those paper law reports, well, it was Chris Gain, who's looking on now. And he used to use this as his private little law reports, I think. Actually, we have one other colleague at the moment who is, I've seen in there recently using those, and that was Myret Fock, who's teaching our probate and conveyancing. And she was in there the other day going through paper law reports. I think the students would have been very bemused seeing her doing this. I'm not sure they'd understand what she's actually doing. But I think it's at one point, I remember a colleague who wanted to set a sort of a series of tasks in the legal analysis where the students would not be able to access something online. They had to go to paper resources. But do you think that's still something we need to teach students?
Definitely.
I wouldn't. I don't know. I didn't think about it that way. As my generation, of course I Google and research judgment and read them online on the databases. But it happens to me when I'm in a library to just take out the paper report and read on paper, just because my brain functions better when I read on paper. Now, if we need to teach this or expose our students to this, I'm not sure, because maybe their brain functions differently and they can read on a screen and be as effective as I am when I read on paper. And I really think it comes down to how much time you have spent reading on a paper versus how much time you have spent on a screen. I don't see it as an essential feature, but I don't know what anyone else think about.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we must realize, particularly being law professors, that the instruments of our daily work are changing rapidly, as they always have. You remember when I was in the United States, in New York, and studied law there in the early 80s, the so-called technique of shepherdizing was a big deal, you know. One had to shepherdize certain decisions, judgments, and find out the line of precedence and so on. This has totally been outdated and nobody thinks of it anymore. And this is just one example that the techniques and instruments are changing, and we can be very grateful for that. It is a major achievement that we have our databases now. This is time saving, it saves energy, it is convenient, it makes the life with the law much more, let's say, pleasant, in fact. And the same thing is true with a conference like the one we are enjoying right now. I must say, I really enjoy that. Of course, it is, so to speak, the second best solution compared to a personal meeting and so on. And I must confess, I'm missing a cup of tea in the breaks, you see, being served by somebody or so, and the one or other chat. But it is also a type of communication which is definitely helpful. And even the second best solution is still a very good solution. Insofar, we should be open and enjoy the progress and enjoy the achievements, make use of it wherever we can, and familiarize the students with that as well. You see, so I think that is one of our major tasks, and we should do that.
Chris?
Can I ask a related question? We've all gone into the pandemic with the assumption that this is a short to medium term problem, which we will all get past, hopefully, and we'll look back on it and think, wow, well, that was a narrow escape, but we've got that sorted. But now the sentiment is changing, and governments are doing their best, I think, to educate us that this is a much longer term issue and it may be with us for generations, in fact. Now, fortunately, I no longer have to worry about these things in the context of legal education. But how are you all institutionalizing acceptance of that? Are you moving in the direction of thinking, well, this is indeed the new normal, as they say, and that what we've knowledge and understanding we've acquired, skills we've acquired over the last few months, these are here with us for the long term, perhaps even indefinitely. Is that shift already taking place in law schools?
I would say definitely, Chris, because nobody knows. I mean, when it will end, if it will end. So I think that's one reason. So Manchester, as you know, are going to carry on online. Cambridge, but I think there's another strand to it. I think we have seen advantages for some of the tools, like Zoom and chat functions, so that you know the setup for our JD classes, where you're teaching 70 people, 3-hour blocks. And you can imagine, I mean, I plan, even if there's a vaccine tomorrow, next September, I plan to take Zoom into the classroom, because you can have, you can't have physical breakout rooms, but you can virtually break up this large group. So that's my take on it.
I think there are other benefits as well, Chris, because I think, as you said, we're not sure. I heard from a colleague today that in Australia, they may not allow flights in certain places until 2021. So, they may restrict further travel. So again, there are the issues with students who are there, even colleagues who are overseas as well. So we've got to think about that. But the benefits that Michael mentioned, we did have some students who were very keen on Zoom. And it came from the part-time students at times who said that, this is very good for us, who we used to have to rush to leave work so that we could get to you for 6:30 in an evening or whatever else. If you were doing Zoom as well, we could stay in the office. Maybe we could finish work at 6:30 and just switch straight over, and we'd have you on Zoom. We're not rushing across town, even though we are down in town, but they still had to travel in. They could eat at their desks or whatever as well, even though they were eating at our desks before. That would help them. It wouldn't be all the time, but it could help them at times. The LLB students, the undergraduate students, when I asked in a couple of our tutorials, I said, how are you getting on with this? I had a couple of them, well, more than a couple, who said that they quite liked it purely on that basis of, if they had an early morning tutorial, or even an early lecture, they didn't have to get up and travel. They could literally be, perhaps in their pajamas in their bedrooms, listening in or taking part in a tutorial with the camera off. Practical sort of sides there. And as Michael said, the thing about, definitely noticed more participation in the tutorials, and our tutorial attendance was actually a lot better than I think it had been before, which was something we didn't expect. We saw, I think, a decrease in our attendance at our lectures, but an increase in the tutorial attendance. With the lectures, I think that's because, of course, they were being recorded as well. So there was that side. And maybe, again, going back to the points that Professor Martinek and Sarah have just made about this idea that we've got to accept that certain people embrace the technology and they'll use it in ways that we didn't think of. And that will suit them.
Yes, I think that is definitely true. May I make just an addition? I must say that the impact of the pandemic on, let's say, the techniques on internet and on the instruments of teaching and learning the law are relatively superficial compared with the impact the pandemic has on our students as human beings. I mean, I must say that I've never seen a face in my professional life where the students were so much embarrassed and disoriented. After all, for many, a almost clear future in a way has collapsed. They don't know what the future will bring, what their professional life will be about. And insofar, the impact in the long run of their career and of their professional life after the law studies is of major concern. And insofar, they are really one can say, embarrassed and disorientated. And that is also a fact that we have to cope with, because it in a way impedes their clear focus on the law studies with a task and aim that they previously had. This disorientation in a way hampers their actual willingness to study efficiently. And in my opinion, this is a major concern that could even become more serious in the future, namely that the students, because of this disorientation, don't actually know whether it makes sense anymore to study law in the same way as before. See, that's also a point of concern, I think. Is it not?
No, if I may, thank you, Professor Martinek. I think it's important to say that it's a difficult time as well for our students, and irrespective of online learning, they're going through a very tough phase, and they don't know what will be next.
Yeah.
And of course, we all know that like all our emails, even to colleagues, start with "I hope you are well." Because you never know, like the other person was. So it's a tough time. On the other hand, I think as teachers and law institutions, we need to provide that continuity. And without denying the fact that, of course, it's a tough time, being able to continue learning and offering online learning and all these kind of things, it's a way to give them hope in a way, and the motivation to go on. And I mentioned in my presentation, we can also now take stocks of the fact that many sectors of the legal world have gone online. So our students now have this opportunity, for example, to do remote internships, for example, at the European Court of Justice. That wasn't possible before. So they have this opportunity that just came up. Or they could take online classes from other universities elsewhere. That is also very interesting, and it wasn't widely done before. And there are other virtual hearings. They can access virtual hearings of courts. So I think we don't know what this is like, how the future will be like, but we know that we have been creative enough to provide opportunities, and we have to show them to our students to let them know that there will be a future and possibly a better one if we take stocks and we learn some lessons from this crisis.
That was a very positive thing to sort of put in towards the end there for us. I think you're right. I mean, Professor Martinek raising that point about the students, a number of meetings I've had with them on behalf of the faculty as well, you can see the strain that's been upon them. And you know, we were very concerned. We've been very concerned. I think we all have, about all of our friends and our families, but as teachers, we're very concerned about our students, about how they've been taking the pressures. We had one of our alumna who gave a talk to some of our students about careers, and she started off by saying, you're probably the only generation who've really been through something like this within our sort of living memory, this sort of idea of a disruption that's occurred within their education. And she was trying to put a positive spin on it and saying, but of course, that means when you go through your interview with your law firm and they say, tell us about some sort of challenge you've had to overcome, you've all got this shared challenge now about this. But yeah, it's very worrying, I think, for them. And we've seen that with a number of the students. The majority, again, just get on. But I think there are quite a few of them that this has really sort of impacted on them. And of course, even the ones that get on, we're not really sure how well they're coping with these things. So, but let's hope there are positives for the future, Michael.
But part of what Sarah said as well is that perhaps we can model the hopeful aspects. Maybe this conference, in a way, models what's hopeful. that we could never have come together. We wouldn't have come together had it not been for the pandemic. But here we are. Back to Chris Gaines' point earlier, I know Chris was always very interested in the idea of offering master's programs outside Hong Kong. But now, of course, everyone's mindset is such that we're geared up to offer programs that aren't contingent on coming to the classroom. And there's an audience of students who are ready to receive those programs. So there is hope, and I'm absolutely sure you're right, Sarah.
Okay, well, maybe that's a good point to sort of leave it at them for this evening and look forward to future things in the next 2 days.